Welcome back, everyone. So you've given us quite the challenge with these excerpts from Sophie's world.
Yes.
It's like, wow, a whirlwind tour through like the whole history of philosophy.
Yeah.
All these big ideas packed into, well, not that many pages, really.
It is, and all those thought-provoking quotes, too.
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, God is not a puppeteer.
Right.
Commit it then to the flames.
Man is condemned to be free.
Yeah, that one too. It's like each quote is a little puzzle.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of our mission today, right? To like help you unpack these snippets, sort through the big ideas, and maybe, just maybe, have some of those aha moments along the way.
Exactly. It's like we're all on this quest, like Sophie in the book, to try and answer some of life's biggest questions.
I like that, a philosophical quest. And speaking of questions, the book starts off with some pretty big ones right off the bat.
Oh, yeah.
Who are you and where does the world come from?
It's amazing how those questions have just echoed through, well, centuries, really. Philosophers have been wrestling with these ideas about existence and identity really since the very beginning.
Yeah.
And Sophie's world uses this really clever analogy to capture that feeling of wonder that we all have about the world.
You mean the magic trick analogy?
Exactly.
The one where the world is like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat?
Yeah. Like, where did that rabbit come from? Makes you think about, like, the mystery of it all.
Totally. It reminds me of being a kid, when everything felt magical and new.
Right.
Like, I used to spend hours just looking at the clouds, trying to figure out, like, how they stayed up there.
Exactly. That's the spark. That's what gets philosophical inquiry going. It's that childlike curiosity.
Yeah.
And even though we might lose a bit of that wonder as we get older, philosophers, they're trying to recapture it.
Right.
They're like, hey, let's question everything. Don't stop searching for answers.
I love that. So to really get how philosophy got started, we kind of have to go back to its roots, right? Back to ancient Greece. And it's so interesting how it kind of grew out of mythology.
It did.
Like those early myths were, well, they were humanity's first attempt to make sense of the world.
They were. Like those myths about Thor, the Norse god.
Oh, yeah, the one with the hammer?
Yeah, his hammer was thunder and lightning. And it gave people an explanation for these natural events.
Right, but it was all about supernatural forces.
Exactly. But then along came those early Greek philosophers, and they were searching for something more natural, more reasoned.
So instead of the gods did it, they started asking, how did this actually happen?
Precisely. They wanted to get to the bottom of things, to understand the causes, the principles of everything around them.
Like Empedocles.
Yes.
Who believed, everything was made of those four elements: earth, air, fire, and water.
Oh, yeah. And those elements, they became so important to Western thought.
They really did.
And then you have Parmenides.
Oh, Parmenides. He's a tough one.
He is. He argued that nothing really changes, you see. That change is just an illusion. It really makes you think, what is real, right?
It does.
And then you've got Democritus.
Okay. Democritus and his atoms.
Yeah. Have you ever stopped to think, like, what is the world really made of? At its most basic level.
It's a good question.
Well, Democritus did. And he had this idea. He believed that everything we see and touch is actually made up of these tiny, tiny things called atoms.
And he figured this out way back then.
He did. He thought they were these eternal, unchanging particles, always moving, always combining in different ways.
It's like those Lego blocks we used to play with.
Yeah.
Each block is simple, but you can make such complex stuff with them.
It's a great analogy. Democritus was so ahead of his time. His theory, it was like the foundation for modern atomic theory.
Wow. It's amazing how those early philosophers, they really set the stage for so much of what we know today.
They did. It did. And from those tiny atoms, we jumped to Plato.
Okay, Plato's forms?
Yeah. It's like he took that Lego idea and gave it a philosophical upgrade.
So instead of physical atoms, we have these perfect eternal forms, these ideas, existing in a different realm.
Yeah.
So before any actual horse existed in the world, there was this eternal idea of a horse.
Exactly. The book uses the example of a Lego horse, right?
Yeah.
You can build it, take it apart, rebuild it.
Right.
But the idea of the horse, the blueprint, it stays the same, even though the physical Lego horse changes.
So for Plato, these forms are like the ultimate blueprints for everything in existence.
They are.
But if these forms are somewhere else outside of our world, how do we even know about them? How do we know they're real?
That's the question that Plato really struggled with. He believed our souls, they were connected to this realm of forms, before we were even born.
Okay.
And he thought that through reason, through philosophical thinking, we could get glimpses of those perfect blueprints again.
So it's like remembering something we already knew deep down.
Yes, exactly. And for Plato, this whole process of philosophy, it was also a way to get back to truth and beauty.
Wow. It's amazing how his theory makes you think about, like, what is knowledge, what is reality, even what is our soul?
It does. It does. And then, from this world of abstract forms, we come to Aristotle.
Okay, Plato's student.
Yes.
Yeah.
You could say that Aristotle got philosophy back down to earth.
Really? How so?
Well, Plato was all about those abstract forms, right? But Aristotle, he emphasized observing the natural world.
I see.
He thought we gain knowledge through experience.
He was big on categorizing things too, right?
He was. He came up with those concepts of form and substance to explain how things are, well, what they are.
Like, okay, give me an example.
Sure. Think of a tree. Its form is its shape, its structure, what makes it a tree.
Okay, I get that.
And its substance is the wood, the leaves, the actual material it's made of.
Right, right. So he wanted to understand the essence of things.
Exactly.
And he was also really interested in, like, the causes of things, right?
Yeah.
Like, why does an apple fall from a tree? What makes a seed sprout? He wanted to know the rules of the natural world.
He did. And his work on logic was hugely influential, too.
I can imagine.
He created this whole system for reasoning and making arguments that, well, it's still the basis for so much of Western thought.
Wow.
But, the book also points out some of Aristotle's not-so-great ideas.
Oh, right.
Like his views on women, for example.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that even the most brilliant minds, well, they can have their blind spots.
Oh, for sure.
We need to remember that philosophers, they're products of their time, just like everyone else.
True, true.
We can admire their insights, but we should also look at their ideas critically, and recognize their limitations.
Right. So we've gone from creation myths to the four elements, from an unchanging reality to atoms, from Plato's forms to Aristotle's down-to-earth observations.
We have. It's been quite a journey already.
It has. And it feels like we're just getting started.
Oh, we are. From these foundations that were laid in ancient Greece, philosophical thought, it just kept evolving, branching out in all these fascinating directions.
Wow, it's like we've already covered so much,
Yeah.
Myths, atoms, the nature of reality, the whole shebang.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And now we're moving into this really interesting period where philosophy, it starts to get mixed up with religious beliefs.
Right.
And that's going to shape, like, the whole intellectual landscape for centuries to come.
It does. It really does. And it's this fascinating kind of cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah.
As Greek culture spread during that Hellenistic period, all these new schools of philosophy popped up, each one offering a different take on how to live a good life.
Like, okay, so the book mentions Stoicism.
Yes.
And Stoicism, it seems like it's having a real moment these days, What do you think it is about Stoicism that drew people to it, both back then and now?
I think that Stoic focus on virtue, on reason, on accepting what you can't control, it has this timeless appeal. It's like, imagine facing hardship, uncertainty, but still having this inner peace, this resilience.
Right.
That's what the Stoics were all about.
It's like that saying, keep calm and carry on.
Exactly. But it's more than just a saying, right? It's a whole way of thinking, a way of navigating life's ups and downs.
Right, right. Okay, so then we have the Epicureans.
Ah, yes.
And they get a bit of a bad rap, don't they? People think they're all about, like, indulging in every pleasure.
They do. They do. But actually, that's not quite right.
Okay, so set the record straight. What were the Epicureans really about?
Well, they were actually more about finding tranquility, being free from pain and worry.
So not so much about chasing those short-term pleasures, but more about cultivating, like, a deeper sense of well-being.
Exactly. The Epicureans, they believe that if you understand the world, if you understand your place in it,
yeah,
then you can let go of all these unnecessary desires and fears.
I like that.
Makes sense, right?
It does. And then there's Neoplatonism, which seems like it kind of takes Plato's ideas in a more mystical direction.
It does. It does. Think of Platonus. He was a key figure in Neoplatonism, and he believed that there's this single divine source, and everything comes from that source.
Wow.
And he saw the soul's journey as like a return to this ultimate unity, a homecoming.
That's beautiful.
It is, isn't it? And it's interesting, all of these philosophical ideas were developing at the same time that Christianity was emerging.
Right. And Christianity brought with it these whole new perspectives on everything. morality, the meaning of life, God, the whole 9 yards.
It did. Think about the teachings of Jesus, the emphasis on love, on forgiveness, on compassion.
Right.
Offering this path to salvation, to eternal life.
And it's incredible how quickly those teachings spread.
It really is.
I mean, Paul, through his travels and his writings, he played such a huge role in turning Christianity from, like, this small Jewish sect into a global religion.
He did. And it just shows you how powerful ideas can be, how they can change the world.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how much religious beliefs shape our understanding of everything, even today, you know. Oh, absolutely. They give us these frameworks for meaning, for purpose, for morality, for how we see the world.
They do. So from the spread of Christianity, we move on through the Middle Ages.
Right.
And the Middle Ages are often seen as like this dark age, intellectually speaking.
Right.
But Sophie's World does a good job of reminding us that there were still some important philosophical developments happening during that time.
There were. Think of St. Augustine.
Okay.
He was wrestling with these really tough questions about free will, about evil, about God's role in everything.
Right.
He was trying to figure out how to make Christian faith work with classical philosophy, and in doing so, he laid the groundwork for Christian theology.
That's amazing. And then you have Thomas Aquinas.
Yes. He was all about trying to harmonize faith and reason.
Okay.
He believed that God gave us our intellect so we could understand the world, so we could get closer to God.
So he saw them working together, faith and reason? Exactly. He even integrated some of Aristotle's philosophy into Christian theology, arguing that reason and revelation could both lead us to truth.
That's interesting. And his ideas, they had a lasting impact, didn't they?
They did, especially on Catholic thought.
Wow. And then finally, we emerge from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance.
The Renaissance.
Like this collective sigh of relief, right? A rediscovery of art, literature, the human spirit, the whole thing.
It really was. It was like a reawakening, a rebirth. There was this renewed interest in classical learning, in human potential, in achievement.
And it was during the Renaissance that we see the seeds of the scientific revolution being planted.
It was. And that revolution is about to completely transform our understanding of everything.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those revolutionary thinkers. First up, Copernicus.
Oh, Copernicus. He really shook things up.
He did. I mean, imagine challenging the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe.
It was a radical idea at the time. People had believed that for centuries.
And he just comes along and says, nope, we're not the center of it all. It must have blown people's minds.
It did. And it wasn't just some abstract idea about the stars.
Right.
It really challenged our whole understanding of our place in the cosmos. It forced people to rethink everything.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then you have Kepler.
Kepler. He was such a meticulous observer.
He was. And through those observations, he discovered that planets don't move in perfect circles. They move in these elliptical orbits.
Exactly. And it's like every discovery, it just chipped away at the old worldview.
Yeah.
Making way for this new understanding of the universe.
And then comes Galileo.
A true pioneer of science.
I know. He was using telescopes to observe the heavens, conducting experiments to study motion and gravity, the whole thing.
He was. I love that story about him dropping objects from the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Me too. It's such a great image.
It really captures that spirit of inquiry, that willingness to test, to observe, to experiment. That's what the scientific revolution was all about.
Absolutely. And Galileo's work, it laid the foundation for Newton, didn't it?
It did. It led to Newton's law of universal gravitation.
Which basically says that everything in the universe is attracted to everything else.
It does. Talk about a unifying theory.
Wow. It's just incredible how those scientific discoveries challenged all those old beliefs and opened up all these new ways of understanding the universe.
And it wasn't just about science either.
Right.
It had huge implications for philosophy too,
How so?
Well, it made people question the limits of human knowledge, our place in this vast and complex cosmos.
Right. And those questions, they lead us right into the Enlightenment. A period where reason, individual rights, progress, they were all celebrated.
They were. It was like this time of great optimism, of intellectual energy, of possibility.
It was. And during the Enlightenment, we see thinkers like John Locke arguing for natural rights, for life, liberty, property, the whole thing.
Those ideas, they had such a huge impact on revolutions.
They really did. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, so many others.
And then you have Montesquieu.
Right, Montesquieu with his ideas about separating powers in government.
Exactly. Which is still so fundamental to democracies today.
It is. And then there's Voltaire.
Voltaire. champion of free speech, of religious tolerance.
And he wasn't afraid to use satire to challenge authority.
Oh, not at all. He was always poking fun at those in power, exposing injustice wherever he saw it.
He was a brave one.
He was. And then you have Rousseau exploring the idea of the social contract.
Right, that agreement between individuals and their government.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of these Enlightenment thinkers, they really believed that through reason, through education, we could create a better world, a more just world, a more equitable world.
They did. And it's important to note that the book also highlights figures like Olympe de Gouges,
Yes.
who fought so hard for women's rights during the French Revolution.
She did. She did. She was adamant that women deserve the same rights and freedoms as men.
Which is, well, it's a reminder that the fight for equality, it's been going on for a long time.
It has. It has. And it's involved people from all walks of life fighting for what's right.
So true. Okay, so from the Enlightenment, we come to one of the giants of philosophy.
Immanuel Kant.
Yes, Immanuel Kant. And he really tried to bridge the gap between reason and experience.
He did. He did. He wanted to find a way to bring together those who thought knowledge came primarily from reason.
Okay.
And those who put more emphasis on sensory experience, on what we learn through our senses.
So he was like a philosophical peacemaker.
You could say that. He wanted to find some common ground between those different schools of thought.
I see. And what did he come up with?
Well, he proposed that our minds, they aren't just blank slates.
Right.
He said we come into the world with these built-in categories of understanding, like space, time, and causality, things like that.
And those categories, they shape how we see the world.
They do. They do. It's like our minds have these filters that help us make sense of everything.
That's interesting. So it's not just about what we experience, it's also about how our minds process those experiences.
Exactly. And Kant also developed this concept of the categorical imperative.
Okay, what's that?
It's like a universal moral law, a law based on reason.
Hmm.
He believed that we should only act according to principles that could be universalized.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that mean?
It means that, like, if everyone followed this principle, would it lead to contradictions? Would it create chaos? If so, then it's not a good principle.
So no cutting in line, no lying, no stealing, even if you think you can get away with it.
Exactly. It really makes you think about the foundation of morality.
It does. Is it just about following rules? Or is there something deeper going on?
Well, Kant, he believed that morality was grounded in reason itself.
Okay.
In our ability to think rationally and act on those universal principles.
Fascinating. So he was searching for this, like, rational basis for ethics.
He was. And then from the rationality of the Enlightenment, we moved to Romanticism.
Oh, Romanticism.
A movement that really embraced emotion, intuition, the power of the imagination.
It was a pretty big shift, wasn't it?
It was. It was like a reaction against that emphasis on reason and logic that was so central to the Enlightenment.
So what were the Romantics all about?
Well, they were drawn to the mysterious, to the sublime, to the awe-inspiring aspects of nature and human experience, you know?
Like that feeling you get when you're standing on a mountaintop looking out at a vast landscape or listening to a piece of music that just moves you.
Exactly. It's about connecting with something bigger than yourself.
I get that.
And the Romantics, they believed that intuition and imagination, they were just as important as reason when it comes to understanding the world.
Right.
They celebrated art, poetry, music, the beauty of nature, all of those things.
And the book mentions figures like Schelling and Hegel.
Yes. They were exploring the relationship between the individual and the universe in these really complex ways.
Right.
Schelling, he saw nature as this living force, this dynamic force, full of a divine spirit. And he thought we could tap into that spirit through intuition, through artistic expression.
Interesting. And Hegel.
Hegel, with his idea of the dialectic, he saw history as this unfolding of consciousness.
Okay.
This constant back and forth between opposing ideas that ultimately leads to greater understanding.
It's like the philosophical dance.
It is. And then you have Kierkegaard, who really challenged Hegel's grand philosophical system.
How so?
Well, Kierkegaard, he emphasized individual existence, choice, the importance of personal faith.
I see.
He believed that to live authentically, you have to confront the anxieties and uncertainties of life head on.
You can't just shy away from the hard stuff.
Exactly. He was all about taking responsibility for your own life, for finding meaning in a world that often feels absurd.
It's powerful stuff. And his ideas, they were kind of a precursor to existentialism, weren't they?
They were. Existentialism being that philosophical movement that we'll explore a bit later.
Right, right. Wow, so we've gone from the blending of philosophy and religion to the rise of Christianity, from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance to the scientific revolution, from the Enlightenment to Romanticism. It's been quite a ride.
It has. It has. And believe it or not, we're not done yet.
There's more.
Oh, there's so much more. We still need to delve into the revolutionary ideas of Karl Marx, the groundbreaking work of Charles Darwin, the mind-bending theories of Sigmund Freud, and the existentialist search for meaning in a world that sometimes feels meaningless.
It's amazing to think about how philosophy has, adapted and changed over time, responding to new discoveries, new ways of thinking about the world.
It really has. It's a constant evolution of ideas.
It is, and now we're getting into a period where things get even more shaken up.
Right. Thinkers like Karl Marx, they were challenging the very foundations of society.
Yeah, Marx with his critique of capitalism.
Exactly. He was arguing that capitalism at its core, it creates inequality, it creates exploitation. Right. And he believed that ultimately economic forces, they shape history.
They do.
Leading to these class struggles and eventually social revolution.
It's a pretty radical idea.
It is. But his idea of historical materialism, it's so fascinating.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it's the idea that our material conditions, the way we produce things, the way we distribute goods, it influences everything else.
Okay.
Our political systems, our beliefs, our values, everything.
So how we make and share stuff shapes our whole society.
Exactly. And Marx saw capitalism as this system where the workers, the proletariat, they're alienated from their own labor.
Right.
They're basically selling their time and energy for wages. Well, the people who own the means of production, they're the ones who profit.
It's like being a cog in a giant machine,
It is. You're just a part of this system, disconnected from the real value of what you're creating.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling, even today.
Oh, absolutely. And Marx, he believed this alienation, it would eventually lead to the downfall of capitalism. He envisioned this communist society where the means of production, they'd be owned collectively.
Okay.
Ending the exploitation, creating a more just world.
His ideas were hugely influential, weren't they?
They were. They inspired revolutions, social movements all over the world.
He did.
And even today, his analysis of capitalism, it's still relevant.
It is. It makes you think about the systems we live in, and how they might be perpetuating inequality.
It does. So from Marx's critique of human systems, we shift to Charles Darwin.
Darwin and his theory of evolution.
Yeah, which completely changed how we understand life's origins.
Tell me about it.
Well, Darwin, he made all these observations of plants and animals during his travels on the Beagle.
Right.
And it led him to this idea of natural selection.
Okay, survival of the fittest.
That's the simplified version, yeah. But it's really about adaptation, about how life changes over time to fit its environment.
Right.
So those individuals with traits that are best suited to their environment, they're more likely to survive, to reproduce, to pass on those traits.
And over millions of years, that leads to new species evolving.
Exactly. And it gave us this natural explanation for all the diversity of life on Earth,
Yeah.
challenging the idea that species were just created in their present form.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing to think about, all life on Earth coming from a common ancestor.
It is. We're all part of this huge interconnected web.
I know. We're not separate from nature. We're a part of it.
Exactly. It really changes how you see humanity's place in everything.
It's humbling. And kind of awe-inspiring, too.
It is. And speaking of changing perspectives, let's talk about Sigmund Freud.
Okay, Freud, father of psychoanalysis.
His work was revolutionary. He said, our conscious minds, they're just the tip of the iceberg.
Whoa!
There's this whole unconscious realm underneath, influencing everything we do.
It's like there's another world inside us, shaping our desires, our fears, our choices.
It is. He came up with this model of the psyche with the id, the ego, and the superego.
Right, I've heard of those.
So the id, that's the impulsive part of us, driven by instincts and desires. The superego, that's our conscious, our internalized morals.
Right.
And the ego is trying to mediate between these two, navigating the demands of the world and our inner drives.
It's like a constant battle inside our heads.
It is. Freud also believed that dreams, they were a window into the unconscious.
Wow, interesting.
He saw them as these disguised expressions of desires and conflicts that we've repressed.
So by analyzing our dreams, we can understand ourselves better.
Exactly. It's about uncovering those hidden motivations, figuring out what's really going on beneath the surface.
I like that.
And it makes you wonder how much of what we do is driven by things we're not even aware of.
Right. It's a little unsettling, but also kind of fascinating.
It is. And Freud's work, It really opened up new ways of thinking about human behavior.
It did. Okay, so from the depths of the unconscious, we move on to existentialism.
Yes, a philosophy that really grapples with the anxiety and uncertainties of, well, of being human in the modern world.
It feels very relevant these days.
It does, doesn't it?
With so much change and uncertainty happening all around us.
And existentialists, thinkers like Sartre and Camus, they emphasize individual freedom, responsibility, and the search for meaning in a world that often feels, well, meaningless.
Right.
They believe that we're condemned to be free.
What does that even mean?
It means we have this burden, this responsibility to create meaning in our lives, because there's no set path, no predetermined purpose.
It's up to us to figure it all out.
It is. And existentialists, they explored themes of alienation, of anxiety, this search for authenticity.
Right.
They argued that we have to embrace our freedom, make choices, and own the consequences.
It's kind of scary, but also exciting.
It is. It's about living a life that's true to yourself, even when the world doesn't give you easy answers.
And finally, we go from the complexities of human existence to, well, to the vastness of the cosmos.
Yes. The Big Bang Theory, which emerged in the 20th century, it gives us this amazing explanation for the origin of the universe.
So, like, the universe started from a single point.
It did. An incredibly hot, dense point, billions of years ago.
And it's been expanding ever since.
It has. It's mind-boggling to think about.
It is, from something smaller than an atom to billions of galaxies, stars, planets.
I know. And it really challenges how we think about time, about space, about the nature of reality itself.
Yeah, it raises all these big questions, doesn't it?
It does. Are we alone in the universe? What's going to happen to the universe? Scientists and philosophers, they're still trying to figure it all out.
So our journey through Sophie's world has taken us from ancient Greece to the modern era, from the tiniest atoms to the vastness of the universe, from questions of identity to the search for meaning in a world that can often feel, well, a little absurd.
It has been quite a journey.
It has.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how philosophy has grappled with all these big questions, these enduring mysteries.
It really is a testament to that human desire to understand, to make sense of ourselves and the world around us.
It is. So as we wrap up, I just want to encourage everyone listening to, to keep those philosophical gears turning.
Exactly. Question everything. Be open to new ideas and never stop wondering.
Who knows what incredible insights are waiting to be discovered?
Thanks for joining us on this philosophical adventure.
Until next time, keep searching for those aha moments.